From a record $4.75 trillion proposed budget plan to an underwhelming jobs report, it's been another testing week for President Donald Trump. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. With the 2020 presidential election less than 24 months away, President Trump is sticking to his message to build a wall on the southern border, beef up the military, and create a strong economy. But with the weakest jobs report in more than a year, a looming confrontation in Congress over border security and international trade spats, is the president losing steam? Well, to help us answer that question, joining us here in Washington to talk about all of this is Joel Rubin. He's president of the Washington Strategy Group. Eric Bolling is a conservative political commentator and author. With us from Montreal is Wang. He's a partner with Alpine Macro and their chief emerging markets in China strategist. And also with us right here in the studio on the set is Jonathan Broder. He's a senior writer for Newsweek. Welcome to all of you to the show. Joel, let me start with you. President Trump has sent Congress a record $4.75 trillion budget. Among other things, it calls for more military spending, there are cuts to domestic programs. And to be clear, this is a wish list. Congress will have the final say on what happens with this budget. The president, of course, will have to sign off on it. But looking at the budget, what do you make of his priorities?
Well, Anand, his priorities are debt, debt, debt. And that is not what the American people want. It's not what the president promised. We have $1 trillion deficit now this coming fiscal year. And there's no plan to reduce that, and it's going to burden our children. And the priority on defense spending is out of whack with the priorities. A significant number of retired admirals and generals have already written that we need to not spend so much money on defense. We need to invest in diplomacy and development on foreign policy. And here at home, cutting Medicare, cutting environmental protection, cutting housing, cutting subsidies for the poor. These are just misplaced priorities, and the president is really harming Americans in this budget.
Eric, what do you make of it? Let's take a closer look at what the president is proposing. We actually have a graphic on this. Medicaid is going to be cut by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Medicare cut by $845 billion. Social Security cut by $25 billion over the next 10 years. And defense spending, that's going to go up. Spending will be up by $34 billion, and that's just next year only.
Right. First of all, can I just say I find it very rich that a former Obama person is complaining about debt right now. President Obama, folks, if you haven't noticed, doubled the national debt over his 8 years in office. President Trump promised to turn the debt down. He hasn't done that yet, but he's certainly not moving at the speed at which President Obama racked up debt, not even close. Again, proposed, highly unlikely you see the cuts to things like Medicare, Medicaid, and some of the other welfare programs. Highly likely you will see the increase in military spending because that's what we do. And there are a lot of Democrat senators who have a hard time voting down an increase in military spending because we basically protect the world. We're seeing that time and time again. This budget, although bloated, I agree, could come down, but certainly has not been bloated at the pace that our friend here from the Obama administration was experienced.
Joe, do you agree with that?
In pursuing.
Do you agree that it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to vote against the increase in defense spending?
Well, first of all, let's put a marker where the problem is. The tax bill that cost $1.5 trillion was supposed to enhance economic development and reduce our debt burden, and it has not. Democrats predicted it wouldn't.
Wait, hold on,
and
Joe,
and it's revenues
are
down.
It hasn't enhanced growth. There were people who said we would never see a 3% growth number in the United States, but we did. We just had a 3%.
And we're not. And
the last quarter growth was 3%.
And fiscal balancing was thrown out of whack by that.
I'm just saying you can't say there's no growth attributed to the tax.
Here's the thing, though. But
on
to your question about defense spending.
Yeah.
We certainly need to invest in defense. There's no doubt about it. National security is the priority of the president, the commander-in-chief. But this is not a national security budget. This is a defense waste budget. Talk to many people on both sides of the aisle. They're deeply concerned about defense spending being out of whack. And cutting diplomacy is cutting off our nose to spite our face, and we're doing that by nearly 30%.
Final small thing on military to Joel's point. We had President Obama for 8 years who called ISIS the JV team, yet they were beheading journalists and Americans around the world. President Trump comes in, increases military spending by, as you point out, $34 billion, maybe 5%, though. Let's call it what it is, maybe 5%. And now there's no word of ISIS. We're not concerned about the spread of the Islamic Jihad across the region. He's winning a war that President Obama failed to even.
All right, let me get to Jonathan. Jonathan, I mean, there's stark differences over what the president wants and what he'll be getting from Congress. It depends on what the Democrats really will be prepared to give him. Do you see a prolonged battle here that could lead to another government shutdown?
No, that's a good question. You know, as you mentioned, these budgets are always wish lists,
right?
And it's Congress who decides. There is a very compelling argument over cuts to foreign policy, to the State Department budget. As General Mattis, the former Defense Secretary, once said, if you're not going to give the military, if you're not going to give the State Department the money that it needs for diplomacy, then you're going to have to buy me more ammunition. In other words, and at that point, every diplomatic problem becomes a military problem that you solve militarily. And I don't think that Congress is going to go for that. And if you look back, the other budgets that Trump has proposed since he became president, he also tried to cut foreign policy spending. And every time, the Republicans in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Defense Appropriations Committee, said no, and he bumped up the budget to, $56 billion, which is where it is now, and he wants to cut that by 25% now. That's not going to happen.
Okay, let's bring in Wang. He's in Montreal. Wang, I mean, it's all about politics all the time. I want you to take a listen to what President Trump said about the state of the U.S. economy, and he said this in his State of the Union speech. Let's watch.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations.
So, Wang, what do you make of what the president said there? I mean, is there an economic miracle taking place in the United States right now?
I think he's partially correct because the economy has been doing really well last year, partly thanks to his tax cut. But that's already people know that. So what's more important is going forward, whether he will be able to maintain very strong economic momentum into another election cycle. I think that will be key.
So Joel, as Wang points out, the president is partially correct there, but we just had a very weak jobs report. 20,000 people, 20,000 jobs rather added in the month of February alone. What does that tell us about the economy?
Well, first and foremost, in these first 21 months of the Trump administration, less jobs have been created in the last 21 months of the Obama administration. That's a fact, and the president is going to have to own up to it that he right now is presiding over an economy that's built off of Obama's successes. I will say, and you have to look at the numbers on this, the deficit was going down each year in the last term of President Obama, and now it's skyrocketed under President Trump. So be it as it may, history, but right now President Trump is riding a wave, and he's not building jobs off of it, and it's deeply concerning because when jobs slow, one needs to look at government to invest in the economy to build that back up, and we're going in the opposite direction. We're not going to have enough money for it. So President Trump, I'm not sure what his vision is for jobs right now. Tariffs with China are not helping in that front, and I'm just not sure what he's trying to promote.
Eric?
Boy, where do I start? Like it or not, President Trump took over at $10 trillion debt, and he ended at $20 trillion. That's a 100% increase. I will guarantee you, whatever you want to bet, that President Trump will not tack on $20 trillion of debt to make it a 100% increase the way President Obama did. That's number one. Number two, yes, at the very last 1 or 2 years of the 8-year term, the deficit was shrinking from a massive number. He had a $1.2 trillion deficit one year. So if you get it down to $800 billion, so here you go, here we go. So now the first beginning of Trump's presidency is because of President Obama, but then President Obama really, the beginning of his, we're not going to look at his because that was Bush's fault. So what is it? You're selective into who's responsible for what part of the economy. Here's the bottom line. 20,000 jobs created, yes. Unemployment record low, yes. Unemployment record low for minorities, yes. Wages, growth in American wages for the first time, I'll take someone else's opinion if you don't believe me, for the first time are substantially growing. For the first time, not since Obama, not since Obama Bush, not since Obama Bush, but since President Clinton. That was the last time we've had wage growth like this.
All those points that Erica brought up, Jonathan.
That's true. I mean, but the thing is about this February report is that, first of all, February is kind of a fluky month, usually, historically. It's kind of when the economy might take a breath, if you will. You can look at the 20,000 jobs and say, oh boy, there's some, there might be some noise in there. But you also have to credit where credit's due. I mean, I've got some of the figures here. The good news is that 3.4% year-over-year wage growth, strongest in a decade. Let me see. If you add up the jobs growth, adding 12,000 jobs, revisions to the previous month, average gains for December, January, and February come up to 186,000 jobs.
Can I just point out the wage growth very quickly? That matters. You know what it matters to? Not the 1%. That matters to the middle class. That is an absolute engine, just a fuel to the engine of the middle class when you have a substantial.
If we look at this,
by the way, Mr. Obama never saw wage growth above 1%, 1 and change percent.
All right, let's look ahead, Eric. If we look at this budget, Bernie Sanders, looking at the Trump budget, he said, and I'm quoting Bernie Sanders, he said it's breathtaking in its degree of cruelty and filled with broken promises, and those are cuts to social programs that he's referring to there. I mean, isn't this political suicide for the president?
It won't go through, and they can propose whatever they want to propose, but the reality is, unfortunately, and I'm a pseudo-libertarian. I hate to see a $4.75 trillion budget when we're taking in $3.5 trillion in revenues. I don't want to see that. I don't think we should raise our tax revenue side. I think we should be cutting, and there are places to cut. And one of the places to cut would be in entitlements. We can't get that through. We put cuts to entitlements, and both sides of the aisle kind of wink and nod and say we can't.
So we just did a big tax cut bill, a $1.5 trillion tax cut bill, and the president said this is going to reduce our deficits, and instead they go up. Americans are wondering where their tax refunds.
The deficit went down.
No, it did not. The deficit is going up.
Well,
it's going to be a $1 trillion deficit. And Americans are wondering, where did our tax cuts go?
They went to 3% growth, Joel. They went to 3% growth.
Tax cuts, the promised tax cut was $4,000 rebate per family. It's not even near that. So Americans are wondering, what is this fiscal policy? Is it $4.75 trillion? And
you can run debt, you can run negative on a budget when you have growth, when you have robust growth.
We don't have growth to match this.
Okay, I want to get.
Can I just say one thing?
Very quickly,
The tax cut, the sort of the energy that it put into the economy does seem to be petering out now. I mean, if you look at growth for the first quarter of this year, it's probably not going to be more than 1%.
Okay. Wang, we're hearing that the tax cut, as Jonathan said, the energy that it put in is petering out. I'm going to talk about something else that could affect the U.S. economy, and that is the trade spat between China and the United States. Where are we right now? We're hearing that it's come to a critical phase. There could be a signing summit at some point, but where are we now?
I think we are probably at the final stage of reaching a deal. I do believe both sides have the incentives to come together, to work together to ease the trade tension, because trade matters for both countries, and for China, Chinese economy has been slowing down, and the Chinese authorities are trying to boost the growth through some fiscal measures. On the other hand, if you look at the U.S., you mentioned the trade numbers of late have been relatively weak, but also you have, if we look at a whole range of economic indicators, the U.S. economy is also slowing down. So obviously, President Trump also wants to have a deal to ease the trade tension with China so that the economy can continue to accelerate. I think that's both sides should have both the incentive, and also they have the ability to some kind of common ground for them to reach a deal so that they can work together again.
Jonathan, how important is it for this deal to take place?
how important it is. It's critical. The American working class right now is suffering from this tariff, which is it was an unexpected cost to rising prices in steel and agricultural products, and the president said that they would cover those costs by an appropriation, which of course got held up by shutting down the government. So this is not working for the American worker now. Now, Democrats have been complaining for years about China trade and trying to ensure that we enforce a strong trade regime with China. The danger here and what we're concerned about is that President Trump is going to cut a bad deal. He has a history of cutting bad deals in international negotiations. He's not going to cut a deal that is going to help the American workers. He's going to find some excuse to get out of it. Maybe there will be a patent that will be released to his daughter and something else will come through. And instead of sticking up for the worker, they're going to be stuck with the bill.
Eric, I'm going to ask you about something else, and that is the wall. The wall is back. It seems to be an obsession with this president. This is Russell Vought, I think that's how you pronounce it, from the Office of the Management of the Budget of the White House. This is what he had to say.
Federal resources and frontline defenders are overwhelmed at the southern border. In the fiscal year 2020 budget, provides sizable funding of an $8.6 billion for full completion of the wall and other border security resources.
What happens next with the wall?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit about where funding for the wall can come, and President Trump has shown that he can be creative and find some funding for the wall if Congress refuses to
well, he declared a state of emergency, and that's
I think that was a mistake,
yeah.
And I think he realizes that was a mistake, and I don't think there will be another state of emergency. Instead, he'll go ahead and find funding elsewhere. We talk about foreign aid. We have a 40 or 50 billion dollar foreign aid package. I think $20 billion goes to Central America. I mean, you really want to you want to play a little bit of hardball, cut back some of that aid, and put the wall up. Americans look at it as like, wait a minute, we're sending tens of billions of dollars to the countries for their aid to build their walls, but we can't build yet our own wall.
Most foreign aid goes to Israel and Egypt and military assistance.
That is not true. We give $3 billion to Egypt.
The biggest
Israel
chunk of Americans' foreign aid is to the security assistance account. Central America gets a pittance. It gets much less than $1 billion.
I disagree with that vehemently, and we can look it up. But I will tell you that I believe that there are several billion dollars that go to several different places in Central and South America. And frankly, why should we?
We don't.
What is it? So what would be wrong with? But we do, though. We spend 40.
Eric,
how many billions?
I'm sorry, I have to disagree.
How many billions do we spend in foreign aid?
We spend
40 billion.
No, we spend last year it was 56 billion.
56,
including State Department operations, not just foreign aid.
Exactly. It's the budget for the State Department. It's also USAID.
Okay. But there is direct.
But Joel is right. Joel is right because
to
the amount of money that we spend in actual foreign aid, the most of it goes to Israel and Egypt.
All right, I just want to get, Wang, I just want to get one more point on the China-U.S. trade talks. The Chinese have said that they will not accept an unfair, unequal trade deal, that Beijing will not yield to any kind of pressure here. Does that mean that there's very little compromise in the works, as they try to come to an agreement here?
I do think China is ready to make some compromise on that front, on trade front. They actually, apparently, they have already agreed to purchase more goods from the U.S. in the next couple of years to try to narrow the trade deficit between these two countries. And also, now they are having this National Congress, People's Congress this week, and in this Congress they are rectifying a new law, a new foreign investment law. In that new law, they are promising to protect foreign intellectual property rights. They will restrict forced technology transfer. So actually, they have been trying to do some things that President Trump has been demanding China to do. So I don't think, obviously they will say any deal will be a kind of fair deal. Otherwise, obviously, China is also facing, the Chinese leaders are also facing nationalist pressure from China. So they have to say, the deal is fair. But in the end, I think the U.S. has a lot more bargaining power to force China to sign a deal.
Jonathan?
The passage of this law, this foreign investment law, by the NPC is a very important thing. This is the first time that they've adjusted this law since 1973. And of course, the complaint of the United States all along has been that American companies doing business in China have to give over their intellectual property in order to do business over there. Now, you don't have to do business over there.
Right.
If you don't want to give up your intellectual property, then you don't get the market. And American business is famous for thinking quarter to quarter rather than year by year or 10 years down the line. But that being said, there's great unhappiness in the United States with the fact that if you want to do business over there, you have to give up your intellectual property. This law will change that. Now, the big question is whether it will be enforced. And the passage of the law will be a victory for Trump. There's no question about that. But again, I say the question is whether it will be enforced.
Okay, I want to move on to something completely different right now. This is nuts and bolts politics, Joel, here in Washington, and that is this announcement by Nancy Pelosi saying that she has no intention of impeaching Donald Trump.
Yeah. Now that's causing some heartburn in the Democratic base, as you can imagine. I think it's prudent. I think she also added that it wouldn't be worth our time, maybe in a little more colorful language. I think she's right in there, too. Impeachment is not something to be messed around with. It's not some legislative tactic. There needs to be a grounds for it. But if there are grounds for it, if the Mueller report does provide that, if investigations that are underway, legitimate investigations, as they all are, Congress has the right to investigate, if they find things that are impeachable, then this opens up. But I don't think it's just a political discussion.
Okay, Jonathan, I'll get to you, but word is that, you talked about the Mueller report, word is that there's nothing there.
Well, we don't know if nothing's there, considering all these people that are going to jail because of his investigation. So I have a feeling where there's smoke, there's fire.
Let's talk about what the investigation was supposed to be. Yeah. It was an investigation into whether there was collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians. So there
Trump
is,
campaign.
or the. Well, no, actually, it was for the candidate. You needed to tie it to the candidate. That's what the investigation was. The original initial investigation was whether Donald Trump was colluding with the Russians.
Oh, there was a conspiracy.
Or conspiracy, fine, fair enough. She's not going to go for impeachment because she can't impeach him. It'll be a loss for the Democrats. There's no way you get a supermajority in the Senate to impeach the president. It's just not going to happen. So why do that? It's amazing to me that Democrats ran on impeaching Donald Trump in 2018 when they know they're not going to be able to do it.
Well, Democrats ran more on fixing health care than on impeaching the president.
In 2018? Oh, stop it. Their only thing was anti-Trump, impeach him.
The danger that the Democrats face is that they're basically basing all of their hopes on the Mueller report. And we don't know what's going to be in it. And if it doesn't, I mean, you've had a number of fairly high-ranking people in the campaign indicted, right? And some of them are going to jail. But and if yet another one, for example, some other figure gets indicted, it's just going to be another one. The key here is some sort of connection to the conspiracy with Trump. They've got to put a dime on Trump. And if they don't, then impeachment is not going to happen. I mean, as you say, they won't convict. But if they do name Trump, then you might see some Republicans going over.
That's right. That's why the Speaker has decided to hedge a little bit and says, let's see what we get. But don't commit ahead of time, and I think that's the right approach. Why commit to a process before you know the justification
but isn't our best
because someone, look, everything about this whole investigation has been leaked. We knew things were coming before they happened. Someone has to have leaked to Pelosi that this is going to be a big nothing burger, this as far as nailing Trump. Yeah, you have Manafort, you have Roger Stone, you have a lot of satellite players, but you don't have Trump, so she's got to start walking it back now.
But isn't our best indication that there may be nothing in the report the fact that there's been no indictments on conspiracy?
Yes.
Well,
or leaks of such.
So far that we know of, what we know is that all of the top people around the president are going to jail for lying about interactions.
Do you remember when President Obama's IRS was targeting conservatives specifically, and the thought was, well, if you just get President Obama an email, a conversation, or someone to say President Obama was involved in directing that to happen, he was going to be impeached. It was an impeachable offense, but you couldn't do it because you guys were smart enough to put the ring around the presidency. Guess what?
No.
All presidencies are that smart.
No, it's not analogous because every single senior advisor to the president is caught lying about their interactions with Russia, which is why they're going to jail.
Well, I didn't say that. I said
but that didn't happen
you
with
guys
President
were smart
Obama.
enough to put a ring of plausible deniability around the presidency, as was the Trump administration.
Eric Holder faced severe consequences. I don't think Democrats got off scot-free on that one.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
That's not what I said at all.
Yan Wang, what is the foreign view of this investigation that's taking place? Or let's put it, let's make it more focused on what do investors think of that?
Well, investors don't like uncertainty, right? So obviously, the possibility of President Trump being possibly being impeached, that's good. It's not good news for the market. So from that perspective, obviously, any policy uncertainty that relates to the politics, relates to the trade, to the economy, they are all bad news, obviously. So now I don't think investors are prepared for any major political shock out of Washington.
Jonathan, the fact that there may be nothing in the Mueller report, is that going to hurt the Republicans in the election?
Going to hurt the Republicans?
The Democrats, sorry.
Yes, I think so. I mean, well, particularly in the presidential election, because what Trump will do is if there's nothing in the report, he will run against the Democrats saying, look what they did to me. And people will listen.
Eric,
at least his base will listen.
I agree, and let me just add, besides the tax cut, this new wage growth in the American economy right now will push Trump over the finish line in 2020 because that's real spending power, that's real economic fuel to the economy his biggest Achilles is if the economy turns south before the election.
Let me remind you, Eric, that a week is a lifetime in politics,
and
we are only in February 2019.
I totally agree with you.
Joel, do you buy that? That'll push the president over the line?
Well, I think that the president is still the president, and because of that, he has an inherent advantage, and the Democrats are going to have a very difficult primary campaign season. It's going to be ugly in some moments, too. And there's no telling how far the president is willing to go to utilize his office to get reelected. That said, Democratic enthusiasm is at an all-time high. We had the highest turnout in 100 years for an off-cycle midterm. So it's not just about the Mueller report. They came out for a lot of They came out for a lot of other reasons, and those are policy reasons.
You know what your enthusiasm is? And the socialist ticket, and that is a death knell to the Democrats in a presidential election.
I know that that's how it's being wanted to be framed, but that is not what won across the sweep in the last midterm.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.